Hello everyone, I'm learning more about Elder Scrolls lore. I know you guys really want me to react to some Gundam stuff, but like I said in some of the videos, taking a small break from it. Well, by the time you watch this, I probably would have recorded some more stuff. We'll see what happens. Anyway, apparently there's extinct and prehistoric dinosaurs in Tamriel. I'm actually curious how this
Hello
plays out, so I'm
YouTube.
curious
The Elder
about
Scrolls
this. Let's check it
universe
out.
has some of the most interesting creatures of any
Oh
fantasy
yeah, it
universe,
does.
from Daedric unicorns to dragon frogs. But among
Dragon frog. Okay, that is actually a new one for me.
the creatures that we can find in the lore, there are several which are extinct by the time of our playtimes, some of
Sad.
which actually look like prehistoric dinosaurs of all things. So that's definitely a topic worth exploring. So we'll do just that and look into the extinct creatures of Tamriel
Thing
after the
bit me.
intro.
Why does I think it thing bit me? I think like a mosquito went into my got into my room and kind of bit me. I'm a little spaghetti right now, chat.
So, extinct creatures. There are quite a few of them in Tamriel's lore, and we will start with one of the most interesting of the bunch, the Verminous, a creature very much like a
Ooh,
dinosaur,
what
which was
the
said to
hell?
roam the province of Morrowind in ancient times. The creatures seem vaguely familiar to our world's Velociraptor dinosaur, or the Troodondid or Dromaeosaur dinosaurs, as Mr. Tarpenpat, who helped me a lot with this video, suggested. Except that these creatures have several spikes and horns and long claws for hands,
What the
although it
hell?
may also be similar to another dinosaur which neither I or Mr. Tarpenpat are aware of, as I am at least unfortunately not a specialist on the topic of dinosaurs. Sorry. Anyway, the Tamrielic creature, the Verminous, seems to have roamed around Morrowind since prehistoric times and died out and has gone extinct somewhere in the early First Era, as Sothasil of the Tribunal, one of Morrowind's living gods, still remembers them from that time. It is in fact through his works in the Clockwork City, Sothasil's own mechanical city, that we are even aware of the Verminous nowadays,
That's
as Sothasil has recreated
interesting.
a mechanical version of the Verminous,
I still don't understand why it looks so weird, but okay.
a fabricant, to populate the wilds around his artificial city, just like Morrowind had once been. In his words, he did this to try and preserve the past as a reminder of how things once
Aww.
were, although we don't know much about how much he changed on these creatures that he recreated. But
Makes
since
sense,
Othasil's
yeah.
stated aim was to recreate the past and accurately preserve it, I think the Verminous would have been similar to the fabricated Verminous, but just without the mechanical parts. That having
Right.
been said, we possibly have another example of Sothasil recreating an extinct species, although for this one we don't really have any concrete lore other than seeing what they look like in-game and in official art. You see, we also have this creature, the so-called hulking fabricant,
What
which
the
also looks
hell
vaguely
is
like a
that?
dinosaur-like creature, and it was also created by Sothasil. So if we do some mental gymnastics, knowing that Sothasil tried to preserve the distant past, and that's why he brought the Verminous back, it's not unlikely that this may also have been an actual organic creature at some time, probably called the hulking. So that makes two Tamrielic dinosaurs which roamed Morrowind in ancient times, which is pretty cool.
Jesus,
And there may
man.
be even more, but we're not completely sure about that. But we do have several other examples of now extinct prehistoric Tamrielic creatures. For example, ammonites, small mollusks with a spiral-shaped
Oh.
shell, at least in the real world. We know that in the oceans around Tamriel, specifically the Eltharic Ocean west of Tamriel, there once lived ammonites in a period which is described to have been
Ammonites.
earlier than the building of the very first Meretic era ruins that we find on Tamriel, meaning that perhaps they may even date back to the Dawn era, the era of creation, which
Ooh,
makes
that
these
is
creatures super duper
interesting.
interesting, because adding to this is that the ammonite shells fossils found in specifically the Eltharic Ocean contain a lot of raw magicka, which makes the
Wait,
fossils
what?
glow bluish. Sometimes they contain almost as much energy or magicka as a lesser soul gem, although there's no way
Wait,
to load
that's
magicka into them after they've been depleted, and they lose their magical charge quite quickly after being harvested from the oceans and mines on the islands in the oceans. Some people on Tamriel speculate that this magicka infusion of these fossils is because the fossils are affected by slowed magic from Thras. But it's
wait.
also
I
possible, especially since the lore book mentions raw magicka, that these fossils are a leftover from creatures that existed when the world was being created, so they were exposed to the raw magicka of a mortal plane under construction, a bit like radiation, which is now why their fossils, so these ammonite fossils, are imbued with raw magicka, but that's
I
just
mean,
my personal speculation,
that
which I
makes
would think is
sense,
cool.
yeah.
The slowed magicka option is also very much still an option. That being said, in this fossil collection from the Elder Scrolls Battlespire that you've seen on screen so far, we can
Yeah.
see not only just ammonites, but we can also see trilobites, which were ancient arthropods living in the seas in our own universe in prehistoric times. But unfortunately, other than this image, we have nothing else on trilobites on Tamriel and the Elder Scrolls universe. So, sorry, but hey, they're in an official image, so they may have existed. That having been said,
Right.
another creature that we don't have much on is the so-called lava troll, a troll once said to have
Lava
been native to
troll.
Morrowind, specifically to Vardenfell. Although some even doubt whether or not lava trolls were ever even real or not. That will be a trend in this video, as you'll see.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Because this is so far all that we know of it, and people on Tamriel actually doubt whether they existed at some point.
I mean,
Like, we don't even know why it was called.
legitimately, I kind of would doubt its existence as well. Cause like, what, how, why, what?
Called the lava troll, perhaps because it was able to live close to lava? I don't know. We just don't know. Now, an extinct creature that we know a bit more of is the so-called Raksu, a bird which had lived in Blackmarsh since before the elves came to Tamriel, where it had some connection to Sithis worship in the society of the ancient Argonians, specifically with worship connected to reincarnation and life cycles, it seems. They were apparently really big, as tall as a mammoth, with huge tongues, and they were distantly related to the terror birds of elsewhere.
Oh Jesus!
They were actually
Christ.
only driven extinct near the tail end of the First Era in the year 2828, a year when several other species in Blackmarsh also went extinct. Because you see, during this year, the Riemann Empire attempted to conquer Blackmarsh and accidentally set fire to much of the province when they set fire to a bog near Stormhold. But they didn't realize that much of the bogs are connected both over and underground, making it so that large swaths of Blackmarsh straight up burned down in an event called the Great Burn.
Oh,
During
dear.
this event, much of Blackmarsh's creatures either had a big dip in their population or were outright driven extinct, with the Raksu being one of the creatures driven to extinction by the event. But this loss of biodiversity was not limited to just the Raksu, as we both lost the so-called long-legged swamp wolves and the Hellstrom crocodiles, and presumably even more creatures than just those, except those didn't make it into the lore. Now, neither of these we know particularly much of, other than that, just like the Raksu, they were presumably big creatures, as at least the Hellstrom crocodile is said to have been a really large type of crocodile, and the long-legged swamp wolves, well, they have long legs, so they may be big, but, well,
It's just having long legs on the creatures doesn't like make it too bad. Look at the main wolf. The main wolf in real life, which is what my persona is based off of, has long legs, but it's mostly has that because of the grassy plains it can be usually found
we
in.
don't really know much else about them, other than that they entered into a steep population decline during and after the Great Burn, with the last sighting of one of these taking place in the very, very, very early Second Era. Now, there are some other creatures where we know that they are extinct, but other than that, we don't know much more of them. Examples of these include flightless desert hawks, which I presume would have been much like ostriches, but then hawks, roaming the desert. We also have prehistoric snow owls, which may have been a variation of regular snow owls, and we also have the so-called musk ox, a type of ox which once apparently lived in western Skyrim, specifically in the Reach, where its horns were presumably used by Reachmen as war horns, which is also literally the only thing we know about them, as a war horn is the only thing that we have of them, but even the description of that warhorn speculates that it may have been a minotaur, so we don't even know whether these oxes existed, but hey, it's worth a mention.
Right.
Now, a creature that we know similarly little about is the so-called Naturbal, a rock-skinned bug which in ancient times was native to Vardenfell and Red Mountain, which were all driven extinct by the Dunmer, with the last one reportedly being slain by Vivek himself using his legendary spear, with a statue in Vivek City actually commemorating the event.
But why?
We also don't know much more about the Naturbal, sorry, as I already mentioned in my video on all the bugs of Tamriel. Check that video out, by the way. It's a pretty good video.
Annoying as hell. Absolutely terrifying.
Alright, but let's return to a creature that we know a bit more of, the
Low-key
so-called garnet bird. A tropical bird that was once native to the Topal Bay to the south of Cyrodiil, and apparently they had a beak with the color of a red garnet, and back in the late First Era, they became a favorite of noble dining tables, often served at great feasts after being drowned in wine. This became such a popular dish that the garnet beaks were driven to extinction. quite quickly actually, as they were hunted down for noble dining tables.
God damn it.
Good job, guys. Now, we have one more bird type that's now extinct that we know of, the so-called gooblet bird, a large flightless bird with colorful feathers native to Hammerfell, which were driven extinct sometime after the arrival of the Yakudans on Tamriel. How they were driven extinct, we don't know.
Made sense.
Could be anything. Could be the Yakudans, could not have been. I don't know. That having been said, we
Could be a change in weather. Sometimes, sadly, certain creatures go extinct due to the fact that they can't adapt to their environment quick enough, such as the woolly mammoths and stuff like that.
also know of the gigantic prehistoric emperor crabs. Gigantic crabs that once roamed the ashlands of Vardenfell. These large, gigantic crabs were sometimes as big as a cathedral, and apparently they were a sight to behold.
Oh,
And
damn.
for this one, we actually know quite certain that they existed, as their ancient shells are still being used. For example, the gigantic shell of the emperor crab Scar was being used to house the city of Aldrune, as we can see in Morrowind and the Elder Scrolls Online. However,
Oh my
by the
lord.
third era, all of these emperor crabs had died out. They were being hunted down by both Ashlanders and by House Redoran, with some people saying that those that remained may have devolved into the mud crabs. But we don't know what's true about that. Now, for the final set of extinct creatures, we actually need to delve into some history. So, a little history. In the middle of the Meretic era, the Aldmer, that's the Aldmer with a D, so the progenitor race of all elven races that we find on Tamriel, not
I
the
hate
current High Elves, fled their homeland of Aldmuris due to it being endangered by some mysterious impending doom. Now, the first place that they landed were the Somerset Isles, although it wouldn't take long before they also hopped over to Valenwood and tried to colonize it. However, these lands that they landed on, the Somerset Isles and Valenwood, they weren't exactly empty when the first elves arrived. In fact, they were inhabited by a large range of creatures, many of whom were large, dangerous, and not very welcoming to these elves that landed on their shores. But the elves didn't really care about that and just decided to kill all of them to make these lands safe. A few such creatures which they encountered, like griffins, ended up surviving up until the current day and get tamed. But not all ancient creatures that the Altmer encountered were as lucky, as the Altmer drove many of the creatures they encountered to extinction by just killing all of them and preventing their procreation in order to make the Somerset Isles livable for themselves, and they then tried, but kind of failed, to do the same in Valenwood. When it comes to the Somerset Isles, there are two main legendary and mythical creatures which were driven to extinction. Basically, we've got the Gaetus and the Iliadi. Let's start with the Iliadi, which is a type of forest spirit, or even fairy, according to some theories. They were creatures with more than just two eyes, as they were forest giants whose entire heads were covered by eyes.
Oh, Jesus.
These creatures were apparently also aggressive to the Altmer, being named in ancient Altmeri ballads as working with other creatures to try and achieve the Altmer's demise and drive them from the Isles. Unfortunately for these creatures, they were no match for the early Altmer, however, who brought ancient magic from their homeland of Aldmuris, which was used to exterminate them in just a few short years after their landing. Now, the other mythical enemy of the Altmer that they found when landing on the Isles and who wasn't particularly friendly to them and they exterminated was the Gaetus. Now, how exactly these Gaetus lost to the ancient Altmeri magic is not very clear to me, because according to legend, the Gaetus were straight up godlike fairies with, according to legends, godlike powers. And because of that, I personally kind of doubt whether or not they even existed in the way that they are described, or were just adapted into Altmeri legend in a more grand way to make their victory over these creatures seem more epic.
Makes
Yeah,
sense.
we
The
don't really
elves
know.
suck.
What we do know is that on ancient Altmer tapestries, the Gaetus are described as a type of godlike fairy, which takes the shape of a single man or multiple men, which are created from the earth itself. This man or group of men is then surrounded by minor fairies, which all do its bidding. Considering that these creatures are extinct, I wouldn't be surprised if the Gaetus was just one of the Earthmen and the rest were minor spirits. But we don't really know anything about them, unfortunately, and even that's all conjecture. Anyhow, those two, the Iliadi and the Gaetus, were driven to extinction on the Somerset Isles by the early Altmer in their quest to make the Isles theirs. But there's actually another creature that was driven to extinction on the Somerset Isles, and that one was called the so-called Isgareth bee. This type of bee used to be quite common on the Somerset Isles since ancient times, but due to the belief of some Altmer that their honey granted immortality, which was really just legend and seemingly not true, it seems that their hives were all destroyed by greedy Altmer somewhere in the first era.
So pretty
All
much
of
what you're
them
telling me
then
is the
went
elves
extinct.
suck.
Although some conspiracy theorists on
I
Tamriel
already
believe that some
know.
royalty still have them in private gardens, but we don't have any proof on that. Now, just like on the Somerset Isles, the Altmer immediately started blasting when they arrived to Valenwood, while the jungles proved to be harder to exterminate species in than the Isles, as many of their ancient predators still live in the jungles nowadays. They did manage to get rid of a few creatures. Most notably the Basilisk, a creature that we see in many types of fantasy, but which also exists in the Elder Scrolls lore, but it's just extinct due to the doing of the elves. Now, the portrayal of basilisks, from what we know, is pretty conventional, because it's a snake with magical powers and whose body parts have magical properties. And likely, just like in other types of fantasy, looking them in the eyes would have caused for paralysis, but that's just speculation, as their eyes, cooked up in a potion, can be used to cure paralysis. So I'd say that it's likely that looking them in the eye would have had the inverse effect and probably paralyzed you, especially since that's the whole thing with basilisks and other types of media.
Right.
That said, their body parts, while rare, are still sometimes seen on the black market in private collections of alchemists and other craftsmen, because their eyes are a potent ingredient and their blood can temper weapons, and powdered body parts can even give you a poisonous explosion, which is all pretty useful. That said, of the creatures which they drew to extinction in Valenwood, we know relatively little other than the basilisks. For example, of the creature, the Odawak, we know literally nothing more than their name, and that they are extinct in Valenwood now, and that they apparently had really big fangs, and that Bosmer legend says that they drove them to extinction, and not the Altmer. We also know that in Valenwood there used to live hippogriffs, who were likely related to the griffins in some way, but they were also driven to extinction. How? We don't know. Hydra also existed, multi-headed dragon-like creatures likely also driven to extinction, although those may still exist in other parts of Nirn. And forest giants, likely related to the Iliadi, also existed and also were apparently driven to extinction. And satyrs were also
Jesus, dude.
in existence, which we don't know anything of other than that they were there and we know their names. We don't even know what type of creature they were, only the name from the Pocket Guide to the Empire, and that they were, you may guess, driven to extinction by the early Altmer who had landed in Valenwood. But considering that in other types of fantasy they are essentially fauns, a man-beast who are part goat, part man, I think that's the type of creature that they probably were before being driven to extinction. In the High Isle DLC of the Elder Scrolls Online, we actually see some fauns, so perhaps there's a chance that those were the creatures that they meant by the name satyr. So they may not be extinct, but we don't know if that's actually the case. Now, a final honorable mention for this video goes to Skyrim's snow whales, a creature which is possibly purely mythical, but may also have been real. We just don't really know. You see, snow whales were legendary flying whales which flew through the skies of Skyrim, just like sand whales apparently flew over the deserts of Hammerfell, living at the tops of the highest mountains and shooting through the clouds, with Nord hunters hunting them fiercely. And the Whalebone Bridge in Sovngarde was said to have been constructed from the bones of a snow whale. But these creatures were supposedly only visible after drinking a strange potion, and some of the other out-of-game legends about them describe them as even more fantastical, so it could also just be some hallucination of the Nords which hadn't made its way into Nordic legend. We don't really know. Whatever the truth is, they haven't been seen on Tamriel for a very long time. And that having been said, that's about all I can say about the extinct
Yeah, that makes
creatures
a
of
lot of
Tamriel,
sense.
and I sincerely hope that you managed to learn something new about the Elder Scrolls universe today, and if you did, consider giving the video a like or one of those new hype boosts that YouTube lets users give. I would be very appreciative if you did. Also, a big thanks to the UESP user Tarpenpet, who helped me a lot with tracking down a lot of these creatures and a lot of sources for my research. The video would not nearly have been as complete without him, so big thanks. And with that said, it's time to thank my top Patreon supporters: Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, King Chris 20, Steve G, Volker.
Alright guys, if you like this kind of content, do like, comment, subscribe. I actually learned a lot, and my hatred for the elves and the Elder Scrolls universe grows as the days go by. I will forever hate elves because they're pieces of crap, and you can't convince me otherwise. Alright, love you guys, stay safe, be good people. You guys want to support me, I have a Patreon now. For $3 a month, I will gladly react to Iron-Blooded Orphans. Fuck, I'll even watch I'll even watch what do you call that stupid thing? You freaking Thunderbolt. But you gotta pay me. I'm not kidding, guys. If you want that, you gotta pay for it. Who am I kidding? You guys probably won't watch this. Anyway, love you. Bye.